Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guildhouse. This is a weekly podcast where I, your host Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop RPG and surrounding DM's Guild, drive-through RPG space. This week, I'm privileged to be joined by Jasmine Yang. Hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Yeah, it's nice. It's a nice sunny morning. I'm glad the weather in the UK is hot but bearable. I hear other places in the world are not having a good time with the heat right now.
Yeah, I think it's very ironic that I live in Australia, but we're in the middle of winter, and it's been a very cold and rainy day down here.
Well, in fairness, like that again, I can never get my head around that. Even though logically it makes sense that on two different points in the world they may be having seasonal differences. In my mind, it's like it's summer here; it should be summer everywhere. But with the almost mandatory weather talk out of the way, that kind of predates most podcasts. For the people listening, what sort of products have you kind of been creating?
I'm most famous for my DMsGuild books, which are Captains and Cannons, which was my first one. That was a naval supplement to D&D 5e. And then the Hammond's Harvesting Handbook series, screwed up the name of my own books, which break down loot tables for the Monster Manual, Volo's Guide to Monsters, and Morning Canaans.
So I guess starting off with Captains and Cannons, how long ago did you when did you actually publish it? How long ago?
I published it at the end of 2019, October 2019. Worked on it for like a few months, because I had a very boring job that I did not want to do, and I needed something else to fulfill my life. And I decided that, hey, I have some basic naval rules that I've been making for my naval campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to try and flesh this out as like a full-fledged book. And yeah, worked on it for a few months and released that. And it did a lot better than I thought it would.
I'm curious about the time. Did the Captains and Cannons, did it predate Ghost of Saltmarsh?
It did, actually. And by, I think it was like 4 or 5 months. But by the time Ghost of Saltmarsh came out, I was like, look, my books have already sold as much as I thought they would. So whatever, I've milked it for what it's worth.
No, interesting.
But yeah, a lot of people, not to try and sound arrogant or anything, but a lot of people have told me that they prefer my naval books to Ghost of Saltmarsh's rules. Not because anything that Wizards of the Coast has done wrong. It's just they prefer my one, which is a little bit rules crunchier, a little bit more in depth.
Interesting. So I guess it sounds like the kind of case was like you were running your own kind of, again, naval campaign. Were these rules kind of naturally kind of developed organically, like with your players? Or was it the case that you always had like this clear idea of how the kind of ship-to-ship combat should kind of function?
A little bit. I did make, at the very start, I used a different supplement that I found online, and I thought, this doesn't work very well. It works okay when you're just looking at the ships themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you actually start to get into how our players and characters actually meant to interact with the ships, like in actual, turn-based combat, it really started to break down. And that's something that I really wanted to fix with my one. So I started to introduce rules very slowly. Okay, so on this turn, you get this many actions to reload your cannons or to sail the ship. And then I was like, this isn't working very well. You know what? I'm going to introduce a whole new round where the ships get to move. And that started to work very well, especially when they were fighting, big monsters like krakens and dragons in the sea.
Interesting. So they kind of let function there almost like environmental hazards where they have their own kind of initiative count where they can kind of...
A little bit, yeah. A little bit. Yeah, because I thought these are massive things. They really deserve their own initiative.
So I'm curious, how did you... Because I know that I've seen certain implementations of kind of ship rules that kind of go down the route of giving the ship a stat block, but then there is that interplay of the ship is one entity, but you have all the players on the ship who kind of want to be doing their own things, but you can't let all the players do all the things on all the ships. So I'm curious about how you kind of balance that so everyone kind of feels like they're having some meaningful input to the ship-to-ship combat.
Yeah, so in Captains and Cannons, there are what are known as sailor actions. Mm-hmm. So sailor actions are broken down into the basic ones of sailing, or you can operate an item on the ship, which is usually a cannon or a weapon. Mm-hmm. There's repair, and there is piloting. I think there's a handful more, but those are the main ones. And pretty much when you're not in direct combat, if you're not in boarding actions or anything, players are free to like choose which one they want. And usually they'll choose whichever one they're strongest suited for. So, if they're strong, they'll be usually sailing because it requires a lot of, strength to use the ropes. Or if they're good at dexterity, they'll be using the weapons to fire the cannons and stuff. And so that really does help like each player feel like they're really contributing. And then in my opinion, my rules handle very well is when the ships actually get very close to each other and it gets down to that like really close minutia of how does each player interact with their ship while still trying to fight in combat. And I think that like Wizards of the Coast ones and a lot of previous rule sets are kind of broken down at that point, while others have gone a bit too far in the other direction, where it like breaks them down really, really hard, and you start to feel like you're playing, like Warhammer.
Yeah. So then I guess the kind of what was almost the tipping point for you then to be like, okay, well, I've got my kind of own kind of naval rules and stuff like that. Aside from the work-related boredom, what was the kind of the push? Like, well, I kind of want to publish this. So I kind of want to put this out into the world.
I just got like, as it became more and more in depth, like I was making all these rules, and then I was like, I had to make some ships, obviously, in order to fill those out, and then I had to make like encounters to fill out my campaign. And I thought, I have so much content here already. I'm just going to start compiling all of this into a book, because I was like, look, I've got it all already, and as far as I can see, the DMsGuild is kind of lacking in this right now. So I may as well just try and shoot my shot. And then, of course, hubris stepped in, and I realized that just because I have a handful of ships and a handful of encounters and some half-baked rules doesn't mean I have a full book. And I had to spend a few more months like actually turning them into a proper book.
So I guess kind of to break it down a little bit then. So on the rules front, what is one kind of particular like ship-to-ship rule that you're particularly kind of proud of?
I am actually very proud of how I broke down NPC crews, because I think a lot of people have had a struggle when they've done a naval campaign of like the DM having to do dozens and dozens of roles to handle all the NPCs. And I just very shamelessly said, you know what, I'm just going to amalgamate for these rules. This is an optional rule. If your DM doesn't want to roll dozens of dice every single turn, you can just amalgamate all the NPCs into like one bonus, and the players get that bonus to their actions, and we'll pretend like the other NPCs are helping you out here.
Yeah, you sort of like hand wave their involvement.
Yeah, and it says very explicitly, like, look, real ships are crewed with dozens of people.
Yeah.
I assume you don't want to do that. So here's how to like break it down so that your game can take less than 24 hours.
That is another thing that I guess I always kind of underestimate about, especially when you take in elements of real life. So particularly like ship-to-ship combat is always exciting, or like the idea of like, there should be like a naval campaign. But then when you kind of think about it, it's like, there's so many people that go into like maintaining a ship on the sea and stuff like that. And then from a DM's perspective, you're like, there are like not even including the roles taken by the players, I still have to worry about, like 10 other people who are just kind of on board and kind of milling about. So yeah, I can see why, especially like when it comes into like, I don't know, like larger scale multitudes of ships, it's the case of like, there's just the crew are this level, they're this proficient, they can just kind of
just hand wave it. It's no one wants to get that far into it. As I said, we're not playing Warhammer here.
So then on the other side of things then, so in kind of developing your own rule set and creating encounters to kind of, again, supplement the rules, do you have a particular favorite kind of encounter to kind of bust out for your players?
For captains and cannons, I was actually very fond of running like the very first sample encounter that I put in the book, which was called Lizards of the Coast. Nice. Essentially, like, because it's very easy to teach, it's very straightforward. The enemy doesn't even really have a ship. Essentially, the basic is you're in a raft trying to get like from one part of the river down to the next, and a bunch of lizard people like ambush you in the river. That's basically it. And it really teaches them, it's very straightforward. Like, okay, someone needs to row, someone needs to handle, fighting them off. And whenever I threw players in there, like when I was playtesting it, I would just give them the rules and I would not explain it to them just to see if like how learnable these are. And they would get them pretty fast. Like they would only read the things that were relevant to them. And because it was such a simple encounter, they really flowed with it.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating because when you think of captains and cannons, your mind immediately goes to like the massive like armada ships. But yeah, of course, it kind of scales down to like rafts on the other end of the spectrum as well. And it feels like a kind of safer way to kind of learn those rules, like again in a more low risk environment of like a river. So at the end of the day, you're probably going to be rivers can be dangerous. I don't want to understate the dangers of rivers, but yeah. Also, again, you have to kind of appreciate the pun name. I think that's like half the work as designers is coming out.
I think most of the encounters were just made because of puns.
So moving on from captains and cannons to Hammond's harvesting handbook then. Was that kind of like another thing that kind of stemmed from your home game where your players were harvesting prone? I don't know what like they were.
Yes. It was mostly inspired by one particular player who, in one of the first campaigns that I DM'd, the first time they killed a young blue dragon, he asked if he could take off a scale and wear it as a shoulder plate. And I said, yeah, sure. And then he asked, okay, does it do anything? And I said, I don't know. And from that point on, he sort of made it a habit for his character to harvest things from creatures and turn them into things. And I thought it was a lot of fun, but it was also very stressful because I had to improvise like all these items and all this balance, keep track of everything that I was saying as I was going along. And I found that as I was doing the campaign, like as I was like prepping encounters, I would go, he's probably going to try and harvest this. What's an item that he can get from it so I can keep him satisfied?
Yeah.
And then as I kept going, I realized like, why isn't there a good harvesting guide out there for D&D? Like so many people are used to it from video games where, you kill something and you loot the body and you get all this loot. Why isn't there something for D&D?
So yeah, I guess it's funny how much content is more often than not kind of driven by one very particular persistent player in the nicest sense of the term. So I guess, okay, well, I don't know. So if we go with like a dragon example, how do you kind of balance that to kind of like, I guess, I don't know how else to kind of explain like the idea of like pulling apart a creature to get things of note. Like, do you break it down into terms of like sometimes it's like magical items, or is it sometimes more just kind of materials? What's that kind of balance of things?
Usually the process is usually that I read the monster stat block and figure out if it has like any interesting abilities. And if it does, then I try and figure out at the very least, well, where would that ability come from? So for dragons, like obviously the most distinctive one is their breath. So where's their breath come from? I made like a breath pouch, like in their throat. That's like where the fire or the acid or, the cold, I don't know what the hell cold is, but where the cold comes from. And yeah, so that they can harvest that and turn it into things. And usually I just stare at the monster art for a while and go, that looks pretty cool. Maybe I can make an item out of that. That's literally it. Like a lot of it was just me staring at pictures and stat blocks until like something came to me and then turning it into an item.
Jeez, fair. No, it kind of makes a lot of sense. And then you kind of I imagine the first the volume 1 kind of I believe had a very positive reception. Would that be an understatement?
It is one of the most popular items in the DMsGuild. Not to say too much, but yeah.
I was going to say, because I think as well, it's got such a kind of eye-catching cover. As well, I don't know. It kind of brings in the whole thing, and I'm really kind of fond of the kind of supplements that kind of I don't know why it is, but it's always a case of like it's always someone's. It's Hammond's.
Yeah.
Did you?
I was.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I was actually inspired to create Hammond the character from the picture. Like I saw the picture first, and then I decided to make Hammond like the character who writes the book. Like, and when I reached out to the artist asking like if I could license the artwork, I was like so nervous because I was like, this is Hammond. I can't get anyone else for this.
Yes, you really already created your headcanon of like this is Hammond. This is regardless of like. So that's always kind of fun because sometimes you kind of like again almost like reverse engineering it from the art first. How did you find almost like creating the character of Hammond?
It was very fun, and he was created for a very specific purpose. Because one, I am a writer, so I do enjoy like just lore and world building, and I do feel that a lot of people, that is a big part of why Hammond was successful, is all the lore that went into it, because it's enjoyable to read. It's not just a bunch of tables, and so I needed someone who, you know, could convey that in a humorous manner, which is Hammond. The second part was that I needed a character that had a certain moral sociopathy to him.
Yeah, I'll be honest. If you view most things as like creatures in any sense of term as not the sum of their parts, but the parts you can take away from them, you're an interesting person, I suppose.
Yeah, because like he's fully willing to, you know, dissect fairies and angels as well as, you know, demons.
Yeah.
So he needed to have a certain like ludicrous character to him, and so I just landed on, you know, that stereotype of that asshole British adventurer who, you know, goes out and doesn't really care and takes all the animals back and, you know, dissects them for science.
So I guess over the like is a good question. Has Hammond's character kind of developed over the volume somewhat, or has he kind of remained somewhat consistent?
I would actually say he's gone like more and more ridiculous with each volume. He's gone like more arrogant, more just his stories are getting like wilder and less believable. I was gonna
say, I suppose following the trajectory of like the Monster Manual to like Volos to Mordekainen's, the creatures themselves do kind of get up in intensity. So the fact that Hammond is still kind of matching pace and kind of keeping up with like, I don't know, like archfiends and just like, oh yeah, no, I'm here to collect their horns, or
like a lot, like because a lot of his character can be gleaned from like what he's not mentioning in the stories that he tells. Like I forgot which one, but I'm pretty sure there's one entry where he mentions like he killed he like killed like an archdemon or something, but everyone else in his party died and he was the only survivor, but he was fine with it because he got what he wanted out of the demon.
So I guess that's another thing as well, because I must admit I do love the kind of any kind of excuse to kind of write in like a character voice, and it is kind of I guess it is kind of it's interesting to especially as you're kind of creating content, to try and view it from the lens of someone else. And particularly to view every every creature as something that is harvestable in some way is I imagine an interesting kind of thought exercise. were there any I guess kind of I guess like in terms of like when coming up the kind of items or things that you can kind of harvest from a creature, were there any particular creatures that proved challenging to kind of put all that kind of information together?
Yes. All of the non-corporeal creatures, so like ghosts, poltergeists, specters, for very obvious reasons, it's very difficult to figure out what you can harvest from something that doesn't have a body. So those were very difficult to create, and it actually took me a while until I like cracked the idea of a special item you could get that like harvests their spirit, called spirit paper. And then that sort of like opened up a whole bunch of new possibilities for that. The other one is probably like humanoids that you can kill, because even those are like sort of stepping over the line for Hammonds, because even he mentions like, look, if you go around harvesting humanoids, I wouldn't brag about it, but if you must, then this is how to do it.
It's like, I'm not proud. I've done it. I know how to do it, but I wouldn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those were hard because I would have to think like, okay, well, this creature is essentially an elf. What's stopping like player characters from just like reaching into themselves and like, pulling out an organ or something?
Yeah. I suppose that when you kind of look at it from that angle of like the players trying to, and I suppose you never want to have like too high of a reward in terms of like what could be harvested, because then the players go off the far end. So that's another thing kind of interesting as well. So it sounds like you kind of through the harvesting habit, you've kind of almost underlined kind of some sort of like mechanical support. So the idea of like spirit paper is in like there's a particular tool or equipment that you kind of need to use in order to kind of was that something that you wanted to kind of incorporate as well? The fact that harvesting is more of a skill than per se just we've killed something, let's hack it up and
yeah. Yeah, I definitely wanted it to be more of a skill because I did want to like reward players who could, get the higher end of the loot and reward players who, maybe fought the same thing several times. Because I know that for me, one of the most exciting things, and admittedly one of the most frustrating things when I was playing like World of Warcraft and stuff is, oh my God, is the good loot going to drop from this one finally?
Yeah.
And that is what I was hoping to achieve with the skill checks. So it's like, yeah, you've killed the dragon, but are you skilled enough to, pull out its breath pouch without it going off?
I suppose that is, yeah. I suppose, yeah, it's kind of, with certain creatures, it is somewhat dangerous to kind of be tinkering around in there. Otherwise, you get like a face full of the cold back. So, no, interesting. And I guess over the course of three entire volumes, obviously, they've kind of varied in size based on like the kind of. Do you think there's like in the future? Do you think you've got like a fourth one in you, or are you case of like Hammond's story?
Yeah, a lot of people have asked for that. So obviously, if Wizards of the Coast ever releases another monster book, then I'll have to make another Hammond's. In the meantime, I've been tinkering around with the idea of like a smaller book that covers all the monsters that show up in like adventures that aren't in like main monster books. That's the main Hammond's monster thing that I've been tinkering around with. It's just that I have a whole bunch of other projects, one of which does actually still include Hammond, which is my next project, Hammond's Herbalism Handbook.
Oh, nice. So
which is, yeah.
I was going to say, so I was going to say, let's hear about the Herbalism Handbook, and then I'll ask my question first. So, is it essentially very much along the same vein, but again, in a more herbal variety?
Yeah, of course. It's essentially Hammond going around explaining different mushrooms, flowers, whatever plant you can find, and how you can use it. A lot of it is like inspired by Breath of the Wild's, just looting around things and eating them to make yourself more powerful. But yeah, with that little Hammond flair of telling stories about things and lore descriptions of the plants.
Have you essentially? So, how have you found? Because I know that like within like if we take like the Forgotten Realms thing, they do have not the most encyclopedic information of like fauna and flora. How are you kind of dipping your toes within that kind of lore port, or you're like, now this is kind of Hammond's understanding, or these are kind of the kind of plants that Hammond kind of deals with? I'm curious.
Yeah, I do tend to like look up whatever is already canon. Like there are a few monster items in the Hammond's books already that are canon. Like they're just listed in the monster's flavor and lore. Like for example, the flail snail, that has like a lore shell that you can harvest, which I did include again in the books. But yeah, because I know that if I contradict something, a bunch of nerds are gonna like jump on me. I do my research ahead of time to like make sure that I got everything that's necessary in there. But at the same time, I do want my books to be setting agnostic. Like I want people who aren't playing Neverwinter to still be able to use my books.
Yeah.
So I do tend to just go right ahead and make up whatever the hell I want.
I mean, that's kind of the advantage though, because like if you look at like the world we live in, there is such a huge like inconceivable range of plants and flowers that kind of even baffle scientists and I was about to say herbivores. I think I meant herbologists. I don't know.
Herbalists.
Herbalists. There you go. I don't know. There's probably like a scientific term in there somewhere. That yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense that like and Hammond has uncovered or discovered these kind of weird mix of flowers that he's tried to eat and has found the negative effects of kind of eating them. One thing I did kind of want to say is that so across the kind of supplements and products you've kind of been releasing, there is kind of a focus towards the kind of player facing and DM supporting rules and kind of supplement. Would you say that is kind of like your natural kind of focus? It's like you just kind of want to create content that both works for DMs as well as kind of rewarding the players for kind of going about the game in their own kind of unique manner.
Yeah, although I have a few adventures that I want to publish eventually, I do want to focus more on stuff that'll just help out DMs like myself. Like I want to make the DM's life easier, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I want my books to be able to help the DM tell the story that they want, instead of just taking an adventure that I wrote and putting it down. Not to knock like anyone that writes adventures or people who buy adventures or use them. It's just my preference is, yeah, a resource that you can use anywhere at any time for your own thing. And I do want things to be readable by players as well. Like I hope that players read Hammond's Harvesting Handbook and find like a monster item that they really want and go, DM, can we hunt this monster down? Because I really want this thing.
I suppose you have the advantage as well, because again, these books can be treated as like almost like in-world items. Like the Hammond Harvest, it exists in the world. There is an actual handbook.
It is explicit, yeah. In Hammond's Harvesting Handbook, it mentions that you can buy itself for, I think it's like 25 gold or something.
That's an excessive.
And it gives you, yeah.
How much more is it to get it signed? Is that?
Depends on how much you flatter Hammonds.
No, but no, it kind of builds into itself the fact that like it's weird to try and think of like the book as existing within the world, when it's the kind of case of like the player and the DM can kind of both kind of say, okay, yeah, you found this book, now you can begin your harvesting journey. Or I was about to say, again, herbalistic. I just want to make the word herb a new word in some way. I'm caught up on it, but and it's kind of the case of like you can kind of bake in all these kind of adventure seeds, as well as unique characters that kind of come with it. And I suppose what is kind of interesting about these kind of supplements versus the adventures, as you kind of mentioned, is the fact that these ones, particularly when they're kind of so complete, as in like they can be plugged into any kind of campaign. You can kind of hear stories about, players who've kind of encountered Hammond along their adventures, or they've harvested like a particular creature based on the book. Whereas with adventures, it is it's less piecemeal, because sometimes you kind of have I imagine most DMs should kind of pull the adventure apart and kind of, again, they harvest the adventure for a lack of better term. They take out the parts they want and don't use what they don't. But yeah, no, I could definitely see the I guess the appeal of the I'm trying to think of like what the label for this kind of, I guess, like supplemental content is.
I always just refer to it as like a DM resource.
Yeah. I suppose, it's just a bloody good resource. So then so you kind of mentioned that you are working on, you've got some adventures in work, you've got like another kind of herbalism, sorry, the word keeps catching me, kind of product on the horizon. When you come to start a new project then, where do your ideas come from? Is it still kind of basically kind of from your own table of your players kind of pushing the boundaries? You're like, okay, well, now I have to make something? Or
yeah, quite often like a lot of my ideas just come from what I'm playing at the table, like a new subclass, for example, where it's usually because I'm playing the game, I'm playing a campaign, and I make an NPC and I think none of the subclasses really fit them. Oh, what if there was a subclass like this? Mm-hmm. And then I go make the subclass for that character, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And I think that's like the key to being a good DMsGuild author. You really have to just keep playing D&D and find out what would a DM want.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of the I was about to say the speed run version. But it is a case of like, yeah, this is something that I need. And I think it comes across, particularly kind of in the content, if it is something that you've actively used and kind of has almost grown over the course of playtesting and just being involved in kind of front of the players. Is there... I'm curious, have you worked on, have you kind of, I imagine with the Hammond's first volume, it was more of the case of like, okay, well, this is kind of, for the other volumes, was it more of just a kind of like a completionist angle that you kind of like, you wanted to tackle all the hardcovers, or was it still kind of player driven? That
it was very completionist. Mm-hmm. I released the first one. I didn't know how well it would do. Turns out it would sell massively, and everyone was asking, where's volume 2? Yeah. And I was like, I guess I got to make this now. So I really burned myself out making volume 2. I think I released it like 3 months after volume 1, which
Wow.
was ridiculous. Like I was working every single day after work for like 3 or 4 hours, just trying to like pump this thing out. And a lot of things like my personal life just went wrong at the same time. Shortly after volume 2 came out, and I took this long hiatus before volume 3. It was like a year long before I actually started working on it. And yeah, I only released volume 3 like last year, which took ages, but I was kind of proud of it.
I was going to say, I think if anything, it was a very well-deserved long break, or like hiatus away from things. One thing I'm kind of curious though is particularly like, did you find the kind of the jump between obviously Captains and Cannons to Hammond's Harvesting Handbook in terms of reception? Was it how did you find kind of navigating that thing of like I've tested my feet in the water, I've dropped my first product which has been received quite well, and then your next product kind of blows everything out of kind of proportion?
Yeah, like when I released Captains and Cannons, my main goal was, okay, I want to make enough sales to get back the money that I spent on the cover art. Mm-hmm. And I did that within like a week, and then it blew up. It's like, oh, wow, this is actually, it's not, for the amount of work that I'm putting into it, it's not great money, but, at least I'm getting paid for doing something that I really enjoy doing. So I may as well keep doing it. And then Hammond's Harvesting Handbook came out, and it sold so well, and I honestly couldn't believe it. Like I kept rechecking things and like wondering, how does so many people like this? And it was like hitting like #1 on the DMsGuild. And it honestly, like, I actually like started to get a little scared, because I was just thinking to myself, a lot of people are reading this. What if they realize I'm a fraud and I'm just pulling things out of my ass? I was like, I only have one book before me. How can I possibly get a #1 bestseller on the DMsGuild? And I don't know. It just happened.
Yeah, again, it's got to be a very kind of difficult situation to navigate from, like you kind of mentioned, like an imposter syndrome side of things, of like,
yeah,
this is something I've just been kind of doing for fun, and this is something that I felt neat, and now there are so many eyes on it and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's actually why my publishing name is Drifter's Game Workshop, is because when I first published Captains and Cannons, I thought to myself, no one's gonna buy a book if it's just by some person. I'm gonna make my screen name Drifter's Game Workshop to make it look like I'm a company.
Yeah. It's gonna be the idea of like, you go to like the offices, and it's like a front door, and then behind the front door there's just you sat in like a very
like exactly, and like in the author section it's just my name. But I was hoping that everyone would only read the Drifter's Game Workshop and think, oh, there's a company that made this, they know what they're doing.
But yeah, I think it's what is it? So I believe both of them, like, so Hammond Volume 1, Volume 2, and so I'm just triple checking now. Is Volume 3 is also, I imagine, on its way towards adamantium? What kind of
Adamantine? Yeah.
Adamantine?
Volume 1 is on Adamantine. I'm not sure about Volume 2. Actually,
Volume 2 is as well.
Kind of sound. Oh, no, okay. But, well, wow. This sounds really arrogant, but I stopped checking a while ago because it wasn't doing me very good. Yeah,
it's because like the jumps between like the from copper to silver, it's like 50 to 100. I can, but no, I think it's really easy to, particularly when you're kind of starting on the DMsGuild, to get caught in that like royalty refresh habit. Of just like, I just want to see. I want to see the number go up. I
remember, when Captains and Cannons first released, I was working like a retail job, and like every 5 minutes I would bring out my phone and go, "Did I get a new sale? Oh my god, I got a new sale!" And like I would message my girlfriend at the time, and she'd be like, "Oh my god, good job!" Like I could track like every single sale by the messages that I sent her.
I don't know. It's like kind of like Skinner box of just like I would like some serotonin, please. Just let me see the numbers go up. But no, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, these days I just like check in the morning just to make sure just to see if I've gotten any messages, mm-hmm. And then I was like, oh, okay, the number went up. Cool.
I think in fairness, I think it definitely is. It's, I don't know. It's weird to kind of chat about this kind of side of I suppose, like, not the DMsGuild per se, but just like content publication, especially when you now begin to kind of like monetize it, that there definitely is like a few dangerous habits that you can kind of get yourself into. And again, it's kind of nice when you reach that point of like, I just don't need to worry about it anymore. The numbers will continue to go up at different rates and stuff like that.
Like, honestly, my brain stopped processing how many sales I was getting and how much money was going in. Yeah, my brain's just stopped processing it like quite a few months ago. I think like about like 3 months after Volume 1 came out, I couldn't understand it anymore.
So if you don't mind me asking, does the kind of success of the Harvesting Handbook series, is it kind of more of is it a motivational thing to release something kind of outside that volume chain, or is it more of a demotivation because it's the case of like this is now kind of slightly uncharted territory for following?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I love the Hammond's Harvesting Handbook series, and I'm like so grateful in my life for how successful they've been, like getting through book 3 was a real slog because like I was just running out of ideas. I felt like I was retreading the same ground over and over again. And I felt like I really got to do something new after this. I don't want to look at another monster stat block.
Yeah. No, I think that is literally a trend across like there's so many creators who kind of find their niche. And then it's the case of like, oh, well, I should do this and this and then by the end of it, they're like, I don't want to do another encounter book anymore. I've written so many encounters, or like I don't want to do another monster stat book. I don't want to do like another harvesting book. I think it's a natural because there's so much content, and there is technically there's no logical end to stop because there will always be more in the future. So it's kind of you kind of need to. I was going to say free yourself, but I don't know. That sounds pretentious.
Look, like honestly, I'll probably come back to it eventually. But yeah, I would like to branch out more. Like I said, herbalism. As I said, like I have adventures that I do want to publish eventually. Like pretty much they're just sitting on my computer. I just need to like format them and draw some maps for them, and they're ready to publish.
So I guess so to kind of chase up on that then, with the kind of adventures that you're writing. What are you kind of are we sticking towards kind of like things that kind of support like a naval campaign, or are we going fully out there?
Yeah, so at one point I was considering Captains and Cannons too, the sequel, like
nice.
The sequel.
Oh, okay. I was waiting. I was trying to think of like a witty tagline, but you already had it right there. So.
Yeah, that was until Hammonds blew up, and that was before Ghost of Saltmarsh came out. And at this point, I think people kind of done with it. The adventure that I'm actually it's more of just a one shot, and it's called Dungeon Defenders. It's actually a one shot that a DM can pull out if one of their players is sick and they just want to like run a wacky little one shot where you play as monsters trying to defend your dungeon from a group of adventurers. Like I've run it like several times for like all my like tables, and yeah, it's just been a blast every time. It has nothing to do with harvesting or naval campaigns, and to be honest, like I'm a little glad of that because I'm also a little like sick of the
I think it's natural going to reach kind of like the almost like fatigue, or like kind of like like too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And I like the kind of subversion of like turning the Dungeon Defenders kind of on its head. How are you handling the kind of like the player characters in terms of like they taking like monster stat blocks, or are you letting players
so essentially I create a stat block for the DM to use, and I go just a little bit further and tell the DM like what's the personality of the adventurers, so that they know how to essentially role play them as they go through the dungeon. But yeah, they have a stat block. It's essentially like those NPC stat blocks you see at the end of monster manuals. Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. I like to think it's pretty fun. All my players have really enjoyed playing it. No one successfully managed to defend their dungeon. Like they've always died in the end, but no one really cares because it's just really fun to beat the monsters, like poking sticks through walls to try and trap the players and stuff like that.
So is it the case that the players themselves are using monster stat blocks then, or are they?
They they all get to pick like a monster stat block of like CR1 or less. So you can pick like a Blight or a Kobold or anything. Usually like the default is Kobold. They just get that, and I let them create like a level 1 player character essentially from that.
Okay.
And yeah, and then like the first half of the one shot is them setting up their dungeon. So they've like stumbled upon this like a decrepit dungeon. And they have to like go through and fix it up while also like avoiding the disused and like broken traps and stuff.
So I like the idea that they have to go through the dungeon, then refurbish it to kind of make it their own.
Essentially, yeah. So yeah, they go through that dungeon, they fix it up, and then so they have like a set amount of time, and then the adventurers come in, and yeah, after that, it's essentially like a reverse dungeon crawl. They get to move around to like all the back alleys and the little like vents that they've created, and like throw stones at the players to try and like knock them into traps.
I mean, kobolds like kind of lend themselves to that, kind of being the kind of crackpot, kind of like cobblers of inventions.
Yeah, because the players are like the player characters that the DM plays. The adventuring party, they're like level 5, and while the players who are playing the monsters are all like CR1 creatures. So in a straight up fight, they will get decimated. So they really need to rely on like all the traps that they've set up and in order to kill the enemy.
Yeah, I suppose it's got to be kind of fun for the DM as well to try and, I guess, play like almost non-optimally. So like the dungeon party aren't busting out like their 10-foot poles. They aren't sort of poking out.
Most definitely. Like that's where like the instructions on the player character personalities comes in, because they're all sort of like parodies of your stereotypical players. Yeah. Like you have your very macho fighter that just doesn't care about traps and just wanders right in. You have your really surly cleric who doesn't like healing people, stuff like that.
And I must admit, I do love the kind of like contained sort of almost like comical like one shots, just because it is a case of like you can kind of pick one up, and if people are like, particularly like I find that like especially if you're running like more serious campaigns, sometimes you just need a break and you need some levity.
Yeah.
And like one of these one shots, like ones where you're playing goblins, like again this Dungeon Defender, it sounds like literally like the perfect way to kind of blow off some steam from
the full intention of this one shot is that if you had a D&D game scheduled but one of your players is sick or just can't make it and you don't want to go on without them, you can just pull out this one shot and say, hey, let's play Dungeon Defenders today.
It's like D&D. So Jasmine, then kind of across your like creative process, as you kind of like you're working your way through a project, let's say maybe Dungeon Defenders to take an example, what would you say is like your favorite and least favorite part of the kind of creative process?
I think my favorite part is I think it's just that initial push where you are free to do like anything you want, where you're like, because that's what really like gets my juices going. Like, okay, how am I going to solve this? How is harvesting going to work? How is the dungeon portion of the adventure going to work? How do ships move around? And there's a lot of like back and forth and play testing where I'm like making a rule, then realizing that rule is terrible, and then making another rule, and then like running the scenarios in my head of, okay, how would this play out at the table? Does this work? Is this fun? Is this easy to remember? Is this learnable? That is so fun to me, because it's like solving a puzzle essentially.
Yeah, and I must admit, I think designers are like innately kind of like puzzle solvers. They're both the puzzle creators and puzzle solvers, because you are creating your own problems to try and work your way through. But it's kind of like that. Sometimes it's nice to have something not work, and we need to kind of have it to work later. It's kind of
I know.
Yeah.
I've had that like quite a few times with like my ship rules, where I'm like, oh my god, these ships just are not like this is not a fun rule set to play, and then afterwards figuring out, wait, actually, with this one small tweak, everything has just come together and it is just running beautifully now.
But then, as I say, on the other side of the coin, then your least favorite part of the kind of creative process, I suppose.
Least favorite part of the creative process is probably the balancing.
Interesting.
So because that takes so long, and it's always really nerve-wracking for me, because the thing that people like will always pounce on is balanced. People will always like. I remember when I first put up Captains and Cannons, like the very first draft, onto Reddit, and asked people like, "Hey, what do you think about like these rules?" And mind you, that the rules that I put up were pretty similar to the ones that I had in the end. People were just jumping on and going, "This is overpowered. This is underpowered. This will take too long. This rule doesn't work." And that kind of just stuck with me forever. And yeah, remember that the rules that I put up there weren't all that different to the ones that ended up getting published.
I think that's the thing that's like balance is so nebulous, and like it varies kind of like so much depending on kind of the DM, the players that kind of interplay. I think especially when you have like a more confined rule space like ship to ship combat, because I suppose you do know that like obviously there can be a ship that is just stronger, but then there are still dice involved, so it's kind of but I don't know what it is about the idea of strength and balance that people just think they can kind of like it's easier to armchair in a way that like they haven't played the game. They've just looked at the rules and they've made kind of an assessment based on like
exactly. And the absolute worst part of it comes when you have to stare at your rules for like an hour and figure out, okay, if that guy picks up this rule book, how are they going to rules lawyer this to break their game? Yeah. It's essentially like the bug testing of D&D writing. Yeah. Like for every item that I had to write into Hammonds, I would like stare at it for a while, just going, okay, can I abuse this?
That was actually going to be my next question, which is like, obviously when you come up with like, again, like easily with it, it's got to be over like 500, maybe like over 600 monsters.
Yeah, quite easily over that.
And then obviously with each stat, there's probably multiple kind of items or things that can kind of be harvested from them. Because you can I imagine you can kind of use the CR to get like a rough idea of like what the party level should be to kind of get something like power level equivalent. But there's got to be, I don't know, there's got to be some creatures like that just like they're a low CR, but giving the players this, I don't know, this like basilisk eye where they could just point it around at like
exactly. I mean, there's that old discussion that's been running rampant ever since like 5e first came out, is challenge rating means nothing and is like completely unbalanced for the game. So by and large, I actually just use challenge rating for gold values.
Interesting.
Because that's the easiest one to tie it together. And let's face it, gold in the end doesn't really matter to most campaigns. The most thing that I ever really just looked at was, okay, if that player gets a hold of this item with the wording that it has now, can they one-shot a boss? Right? Yeah. Like that's always the situation that like I play with my head first, is like, okay, if they have created this item that, as far as I'm aware, should only let them, say, make someone increase their damage just a little bit, can they somehow abuse those rules to one-shot a Tarrasque?
And if it within the kind of flow diagram, if it goes to yes at any point, the item probably needs to
and I'm like, okay, I gotta reword this now.
Is it kind of the case where, like, particularly with harvesting stuff, like, you kind of have that flexibility to in most cases be like, well, most of these items are like, you know, like take the dragon, I was going to say air sack,
the cold pouch.
The cold pouch, yeah. Obviously, if you just like squeeze it or just to get it all out, then that feels like a one-time use kind of thing. So I imagine you have like some flexibility with some of these items. That it's not the case. You can't just
there were like some ways to balance a few things. Like, for example, there's only a limited amount of them. It like pops if you use it. It's like a one-time use thing. Some of them are only useful if you've crafted it into something else, which takes a lot of gold. So that's kind of like a level limiter. Like if you're a level 2 player, you got the item, but you need to spend like 10,000 gold to like turn this into something good. You're not going to have that until like much later in the campaign.
And at that point, you've been carrying around this weird monster part in your bag.
and other times I was just like, okay, look, the DC to harvest this thing is 25. If you manage to get it, you deserve this overpowered item.
Yeah, I suppose there is that case of like like for lower level parties, if they can kind of reach those somewhat perceived unachievable skill checks, and sure, go nuts. And it falls to if sometimes. there's that vice versa of like, the relationship between player and DM shouldn't necessarily be antagonistic. But the moments where the DM forgets about something the players have, and the player's like, well, I'm going to bust out my I say dragon sack. Every time I'm saying something different. My airbag, and they use it in that moment to kind of like clinch like a pivotal moment. Those are the moments you kind of live for. You as a DM you can't be mad because it's like, oh, this is classic D&D.
I only wanted to present players with like more options and more ways to like throw back to earlier in the campaign of like, I've been carrying this item around since we were level 2 and it's finally useful in this one very specific situation. That's always so fun. I'm never mad as the DM when that happens.
Yeah, it's kind of nice because I think there's a good amount of stuff that players just forget that they have. They're like, oh yeah, that core story item that we've had for a while that I just forgot I had in my bag. I should probably...
They always end up with like a rotting like troll hand in their bag or something.
Yeah, it's deep pockets. I don't know what it is. Like they the hand just naturally, or like the rotten stuff just falls to the bottom that they just ignore about it. And most characters just can't smell, I imagine.
I mean, like, who among us can say that their like high school locker or backpack was completely clean, right?
It's true. Yeah, there's things that sneak in there and last longer than you expect. So then across the kind of your whole creative journey, would you say that there's been kind of one lesson that maybe you wish you learned sooner, or you would go back to like past you to be like, hey?
I would like, if I could go back and give past me some advice, I would just tell her, just don't worry about what everyone thinks. Just, write it and throw it out there. Because I kind of like tore myself up when I was younger, thinking, oh my God, are people going to like this? Are people going to buy it? Are they going to like mock me for making the worst rule set ever? But the advice I would just give is, just make it, try it out, get some feedback from other people, and just go again if it fails.
Do you think in your case that the hesitancy, again, stop me if I'm getting like too deep in any way, but like the kind of the initial success you had with Captains and Cannons and Hammond kind of put in that hesitancy to kind of just throw it out there because you knew that there was going to be potentially more eyes on it?
Yeah, I do. I am very aware that I have more eyes on me than with Captains and Cannons first released. And I know that if I release something, a lot of people are going to be reading it probably and judging it. And that is a little nerve-wracking. I do definitely get like every month or so, there's someone who brings up like this one error in volume 3. And I still haven't gone around to fixing it. It's really bad. But
again, there's no total complete obligation to kind of go back and kind of, I think most reasonable people should kind of accept that they kind of are as they are, and kind of small kind of niggling mistakes. They're just like, but I suppose it's easy to say that as like not the creator, especially I know for a fact, like if someone told me like, yeah, you've got this weird thing going on, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I will fix it. I'll add it on my mounting to-do list, and I will get to it at some point. And then I get to it and I'm like, oh, this just makes me sad. So wow, geez. So then I guess kind of looking more to the future and the kind of community as a whole, would you say that there is anyone in particular like around the kind of tabletop RPG community that like particularly kind of inspire your work, or just you?
No, I wouldn't be arrogant enough to say me. I would probably say I am very inspired by Lisa Penrose, the community manager of the DMsGuild. Yeah. She's fantastic to talk to. Every time I've emailed her with things, she's very good at handling complaints. She learns a lot, and she's very open with the community. Like I think she's very underappreciated for the work that she does, because she is essentially like the bridge between us and Wizards of the Coast, right?
And I must admit, I think there's been recent. So Wizards of the Coast have recently, for one of the first times ever, they started tweeting about DMsGuild products, and I'm 90% sure that that's all Lisa's work. I'm fair that she's been working on it in the background, and while she can't like come out like it was me, I did it, she's gonna. It's such a fantastic kind of beacon for the kind of DMsGuild community, and I don't think it would necessarily be the same place it would be now without her.
Like with her and her passion, it does always feel like there is someone on that side rooting for us.
Yeah, no, we in terms of like communities to dip in and community managers to get, I think we lucked out a little. So then I guess so you've kind of mentioned as well some of the future stuff that you're kind of working on kind of more in the more kind of immediate horizon, but often like the far horizon, like in terms of like dream projects, would you say that you've got anything kind of kicking about?
Oh geez. Yeah, like beyond the many DMsGuild products that I have like in the back burner, one day I would want to like create my own rule set. I would very much like hope one day to like completely build something up from scratch, like a whole setting, rules, and tailor to exactly the kind of game that I like to play. I have no idea how far into the future that is, if ever.
If you don't mind me asking, then what sort of game do you like to play that you would kind of like to try and support via rules?
I really like steampunk setting campaigns, and I would really appreciate like something with the simplicity of D&D 5e that still manages to incorporate magic and steampunk technology into it. Deadlands was okay. It was pretty fun. It was a little too light on the magic and focused a bit too much on like, horror. I mean, not too much, but like it's just what the game is.
Yeah.
I would like something that's a bit more, suitable for someone who wants to pick up, just more of a lighthearted steampunk magic campaign.
I think what's kind of awesome about like, especially when you come to like the kind of overlaps between like magic, like steampunk, like cyberpunk, all those kind of different kind of settings, is the fact that kind of the unique combination of any of the three kind of lend themselves to their own mechanical rules to kind of support that world, and that's how you can kind of end up with like completely new systems that kind of, this system perfectly captures what it would be like to be, that kind of steampunk magician, or, to kind of just be full on steampunk. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, there's always that like old meme of people saying, go play something other than D&D. And I don't know, it is just kind of a shame that it's a little hard to adapt D&D to something that isn't just like sword and sorcery. Because I mean, I enjoy other settings. Sword and sorcery fantasy is great, but I would want to play like more stuff that's beyond just say Eberron.
I think here's the thing. I think it comes down to the question that D&D has, again, within the DMsGuild, they're like, here's how you can do like a sci-fi setting and stuff like that. And it's like, but from the ground up, the game was built for swords and sorcery. It's kind of within the game's as a DNA, I don't know, blood. And that's why trying to play it within the other side, it feels disjointed, and it doesn't necessarily, which is why you should, some cases it's a case of like, maybe look towards another system. Maybe, maybe there is that kind of captures that energy in the right sort of way. But there's maybe a point in there somewhere. I've lost myself in the transit. But
no, it makes a lot of sense. At the very least, I understand it.
Like that's all I go for. As long as like the other, like anyone listening, if they don't understand me, that's too bad. I've got affirmation here.
Yeah, I'll give you that instant gratification. Don't worry.
Yeah, dude. Refresh the royalty page. There we go. But then more kind of generally then. Because Jasmine, looking at the time, we've done it. This is becoming my new close. I'm liking it. I look at the time. I go, it's now been an hour. I get to say we've done it. But I don't want to leave this podcast without hearing more, like a little bit more about some of the stuff you're working on at the moment, and what we can expect on the horizon. And again, maybe more importantly, where the people listening can kind of get news about your work.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, I'm working on Hammond's Herbalism Handbook, hopefully to be released sometime in 2021.
Nice. That's a good timeline to have. I think it's good to have that flexibility.
Without breaking any like confidentiality stuff, I am in a collab with some certain other DMs Guild authors, making some. I don't know how far in I can go into saying it,
I'm always any guests. I'm always like, let's not break no NDAs.
Yeah,
Let's just let you
it should be released within the next few months, most likely before Hammond's Herbalism Handbook will. And other than that, you can find news about my work on my Twitter page at Drifter Workshop on Twitter, or you can just follow me on the DMs Guild.
Yeah, no, there's. I was gonna say, do the DMs Guild? Do we have? I know on the drive-through they have like the follow. I don't know. Do we have that?
I believe there is a follow. I believe there is a follow function. You really have to look for it though. Yeah. It's not great.
No, it's fair. It's we're a little bit behind at the times, but yeah, no fair. I you know what I should you've reminded me. I should do a push to get people to well, one, follow you. Also maybe follow me. I should be pushing that more often. But no, honestly, no, exciting times, and obviously as well, there's maybe some dungeon defending in as well, kind of up in the. I think it's always the case, like especially with things that like in that kind of project. I don't want to call not project graveyard. They're in that kind of like extra planar existence where they're not quite living or dead. They're just like they're stasis.
I know exactly what you mean. Like I like to think of them as like eggs. They could hatch at any minute, but I have to like sit on them for a while. Yeah, you got to wait for that creative. That's the perfect like simile or like the metaphor for. They're just eggs, and sometimes you need the kind of creativity to spark before they can hatch. But in time, they're warming up any day now. So. Jasmine, I can't thank you enough for taking some time out of your day to sit and have this chat. It's been delightful. I was about to say, it's that case of I was about to say something pretty bad. I was going to say that I've had fun harvesting information, but I realized that's so cringy that I stopped myself. But now I've done it anyway, so there's no escaping. I appreciate puns for what it's worth, and it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for having me on. No, and my gut instinct is always to say anytime, but I must admit I don't know if like a podcast with the same guest every week. I don't know. Maybe it's a new format that I could try out. But I'm sure we could come up with more ways of saying dragon sack. I don't know. I'm pretty sure between that and herbalology, I've expended every sort of dragon bag, dragon orb or cold bag, air bag. There's honestly I might have to like jump cut them all together. But that sounds like a lot of editing work. So I'm instead just going to say I've been Matthew Whitby. Thank you very much for listening. I have some things and stuff maybe coming out. Who knows? I'm going to say I've got stuff coming out in 2021 as well. So keep your eyes peeled. But Jasmine, my very final question, and arguably the most important, how do you end a podcast? So as I said, I really like puns. And in case people haven't guessed, in case people couldn't tell already, I am a trans woman. So I like to end things by saying the transmission is over.